Welcome to the Ghost Show online, my fiends, booze, and ghouls. Your hosts, Seika Groves, Rachel Benter, and Ian Russell will discuss all things paranormal. Prepare to be afraid.
So, anyway, today's show, we decided to talk about Auchmar. Now, Rachel, I know you've never been there.
Nope, this is new to me. You'll be teaching me.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where it's just a really cool spot. It's got a lot of history, but it's also got a lot of other interesting stories to go with it too. And I've experienced my own personal paranormal experiences at Auchmar. Ian, you've also been.
I have as well.
Auchmar, yeah. And yep, have you done any investigations at Auchmar?
Not an official one.
Okay.
I've only ever actually been there once.
Oh, okay.
And it was for one of those what they call the doors open.
Right.
Okay.
That's held here in Hamilton every now and again, and you get to go into these buildings that normally you're not allowed to access. So it's a pretty cool weekend when they do this. And a couple of years ago it was Auchmar on the list. So I went. That's the one and only time I've ever been in there.
Oh,
and of course, because it's a public weekend event, you know, there was no way we could start doing a paranormal investigation. But we'll get into that.
Ian, what drew you to go there? Like, is it something you'd heard about the paranormal community where, you know, other people have done investigations there and you thought you'd give it a try yourself? Or
no, when you'll understand why there's been no investigations there as we progress here today. But no, what drew me there was just the history. Living here in Hamilton, I've known of this building my entire life, but I've never been able to gain access except for this one weekend. So it was really the history that brought me into it.
Gotcha.
Of course, having heard some of the ghost stories that go along with it. But no, mainly it was a historical visit.
Okay, so Seika, have you been there?
Yes.
You did a paranormal investigation.
I've been there a couple of times now. I've never been there for a formal investigation. My first time I went to Auchmar was during one of the doors open, and this is going back to, I think, about 2012. So that was the first time.
And you said it's in Hamilton, Canada?
Yes.
That's where it is? Okay.
Yes. And I used to live in downtown Hamilton near the lake, near the old North End. And we used to go up the mountain quite a bit, and we'd pass by the property, and you can't really miss it when you're passing by, because it has some very unique features. Additionally, but yeah, where do we want to start with this, Ian? I guess we should just go through the history.
Yeah, let's start with the history, and then we can progress into the haunted topics.
Right. So I'll give a very condensed history on the house because it actually has a very, quite elaborate history, right? But initially, the property itself was purchased by someone by the name of Isaac Buchanan. And Isaac Buchanan came from Scotland. He was from Glasgow. And he immigrated to Canada in about 1830, I believe it was. But he set up a business in Toronto. And his father was a very well-known merchant. And so he sort of took over the same ropes and, sort of proceeded to be quite successful. And he ended up going into politics like many did in those times when they came to Canada. And it sort of purported to say that people like John A. Macdonald and Allan MacNab and even Pope John Paul II visited Auchmar once it was built. But he put the property up in 1854. And it looked different than it does today. And I have this really cool old painting of Auchmar from the late 1800s. And unfortunately today, when you look at the house, it looks a little bit, well, it looks very destitute as it's been empty.
Yeah. Oh, it is.
But at the same time, it's missing a lot of its original features. So when you look at the front of the house, what people perceive as the front of the house, it's actually the back of the house.
Oh.
When you come into the drive today, that actually pulls up to the back of the property. The front of the house faced 80 acres. And it onto 80 acres of land, and it was beautiful with trees, and he did eventually do some planting, a little bit of farming. Now obviously he himself didn't, he hired people to do that for him. In 1945, a group of nuns known as the Hungarian Sisters of Social Service purchased the property for $32,500. And 1949, the city of Hamilton bought a large portion of Auchmar from King George VI for $1. So as a result, Auchmar estate.
Oh, wow.
What's that? A pound. Well, it would have been a pound, but it was in the 1949 Canada, so it was literally $1.
Gosh.
Yeah, as a result, the Auchmar estate is now comprised of only 9 acres compared to its original, which was 190. So in 1997, Alexandra Langs and Jane O'Finn, yes, members of the Hamilton Garden Club, requested a meeting with Diane Dent, who was the chair of the Municipal Heritage Committee in the city, in order to help preserve Auchmar. And in 1998, the club presented Brenda Yates with a letter from the city that requested Auchmar to be preserved. So even today, we're still in the throes of nobody knows what to do with this property. It has gone through all kinds of things. Now, when the sisters were there, they added some very unusual architectural features to the property. Ian, am I correct?
Oh my God. They built this god-awful retro 1960s.
1940s.
Chapel on the back of the house.
Yeah.
It's a separate building, but they built this god-awful thing on the back of the house.
It's on top of
it's ugly. It's a really ugly building.
It's weird. It's a round building, but on top of that, there's very austere 2-story block residences where they were staying. Right. So when the sisters would come, but this property, apparently it was a huge retreat as well for the religious sisters. So they had everybody from school kids to priests to married moms to all of these people coming and doing these religious retreats at this location. So when you go on the property, and I don't know, obviously some people may feel very different, but for me, I just find it wigs me out. The weird juxtaposition of this beautiful old Gothic style manor, and then this very weird 1950s block residential, almost like hospital wing looking, and then this strange round chapel is in the middle of it, and it's just bizarre. And I mean, it has a very strange feel to it. The original dovecote is still on the property, the original coach house, which the sisters, and the sisters changed that into living quarters as well, because they did not have enough room initially in the beginning. And so the property has undergone many different odd things.
Different personalities, yeah.
Originally, Ian, I don't know if you knew this, but when you pull up to the back there and you walk into the back, and you've got the house itself has what appears to be almost 2 wings that protrude out with that long flat wall. That used to be a glassed-in veranda, and it was on the front and the back of the property. So that even in the cold in the wintertime, when it was sunny, you could go outside and sit in this beautiful glassed-in veranda. And the original painting shows the veranda still being there with all of its windows. So almost like a conservatory, right? Where we would sit inside a conservatory. And it was on the front side and the back side of the house. So it looked very different than it does today, although the main bones of the house are still there. But so let's talk about our experiences at the house, because Rachel hasn't had the opportunity to be there, and she can look at the pictures and you can see the interior. I mean, it's a fantastically architecturally beautiful home. It's got these Gothic hallway that when you come in, there's this big long, and it's in the shape of a cross.
Yeah.
So when you come
the house, when you go in there, you have the main floor and the second floor. And yes, as Seika says, it's this great big long hallway on both floors, and then you have all the rooms off to the sides.
Yeah.
And architecturally, it's really beautiful. You've got these arched ceilings, and the windows are arched, and the doorways are arched, made out of all of this beautiful antique wood. Just unfortunately, you go in there now and overlooking the architecture, just the place is falling apart.
And a number of years ago, they auctioned off all the beautiful chandeliers and all. Side. Some stuff had gone missing, and apparently,
oh my goodness,
one of the original chandeliers in a garage. So. Not a garage on the property either. Like when I was there for Doors Open, the second time I went, which was probably around the same time you were there, Ian, the last time it was open, somebody was telling me the story that it was either their grandfather's garage or somebody's garage, and they had discovered one of the original little chandeliers that used to be
my God,
property. So I know that over the years, bits and pieces have gone missing. It is. And it's weird because for a while, too, I believe it was the Catholic School Board that was going to purchase it and use it for their offices. And then there was mention of turning it into a museum. I mean, Hamilton has a lot of historic home museums already. Although
I think we should buy it and set up our new paranormal base there.
I'm betting that the city isn't going to let it go for less than about probably 20 or 30 million. So
gosh, I don't have much, unfortunately. I won't be able to get a small business loan for that, but one can try.
But there's some friends of Auchmar. They've been for many years trying to
that's heartbreaking to me. Hearing them taking pieces away from the original pieces from the property is really heartbreaking to me. It's a shame.
But the thing is that over the years, I mean, when it became the military facility, like for the guys from the Air Force, the convalescent hospital and place, it really took on an eerie, strange, like that's it really feels weird when you walk into areas that still have this medical feel to it. It's very austere.
And what she found, and this is her paranormal experience.
Yeah, let's see if she picked up like I did.
Was feeling watched the entire time. And she says that it felt like somebody was following her. You know, the entire, and we spent a couple hours because I wasn't going to waste the opportunity to really experience being in this building for probably maybe the first and only time. And so we spent a good chunk of the afternoon in there. And yeah, she said it just felt like somebody was following her the whole time, watching her.
I honestly had the same feeling. And what's even more bizarre is when we walked in the door, and it was quite busy, right? Because it was doors open and there was quite a lot of people going in and out. But I can tell you, when spirits want to let you know that they're there, they don't care.
That's true.
That's right.
That is so true.
That's right.
They pick up on your energy, they know. But it was really interesting for me because when I had visited the property, I really knew very little about it the first time I was there in 2012-ish or somewhere in that vicinity. I just wanted to go because the house was open and we knew it as a historical property, but it was never really accessible to the public. We've been on the grounds a couple of times, just walking around and experiencing the weirdness that is the property itself, but going in. So when I first came inside, we were greeted by a doors open volunteer, and I remember them giving us a little pamphlet at the time on doors open and, you know, the properties that were visible and stuff. And as I walked through the door, the strangest thing happened. There were like 3 children that just charged at me. And when I say that, though, I'm not sure that they were actually spirits. I think it was more just residual energy. But the interesting thing is that I knew, like I say, I knew nothing about the property at the time. I'd never read about it. I didn't even, you know, I didn't even know what it was called at that point. I didn't know it was called Auchmar. I was just like, oh, it's that kind of creepy Gothic house up on the hill across from the school.
Yeah.
So,
we all have one of those.
But the interesting thing was that I got the name Jane and I got the name James. And, you know, and it was like, oh, there were children in this house. You know, it was that feeling of quite a large number of kids. And I pegged it sort of between 8 and 10 children. And it was interesting that this energy came forward from a Jane and a James. And again, I didn't believe at the time that they were spirits, just like a residual energy almost, but I was able to pick up on these names. And then as we walked through the property, we were actually upstairs. We went up the servants' staircase and up into the servants' quarters. And at that time, I think part of the staircase was still cordoned off because it was unsafe to continue to the actual servants' quarters. But I remember going up there, and then I remember coming back down, looping around, going in the hallway, going to the left, which I believe was when we encountered the room that was the part of the military facility. I mean, it was all military hospital, but it was a room that still felt very much like, you know, with the tile and kind of cold and austere. And at that point, I remember my left arm going incredibly icy cold, like just ice cold, and as if somebody had gripped my hand and was hanging on for dear life. My whole arm was cold. And I said to Ed at the time, I said, oh my God, my hand is freezing, like feel my hand. And this was, I guess it's September. Was it September, I think, when we had the doors open? It was warmish out. I remember that. It wasn't cold. And I remember he touched my hand and it was like ice. My one hand, my other hand was totally fine. This hand was so cold. And I could feel it all down my left arm. And it was just absolutely freezing and just felt like someone was clutching onto me. And then as we left the room, it was still there. It just hung on. And at one point, it literally felt like it had climbed onto my back and like a piggyback ride almost. It was just sitting on me and I was freezing. My whole head was cold. My back was cold. And at that point, we crossed the hall and we walked into what is now, what would have been the dining room, that big, open, huge dining area. And I remember being in that room and this cold still on me. And then at that point, I started to get that feeling of the heavy, almost like a big weight. Rachel, you know, when you get that pressure pushing
I've
down.
had that, yeah.
It pushes down on your shoulders. And
then,
and I just felt like I couldn't get this presence off of me at that point. You know, I remember saying to Ed, my husband, you know, this is really weird. Like, I don't often get that feeling of the cold, like running up the body. And, you know, I kind of wanted to get rid of it. But at that point, it was just, it hung with me for a good portion of my walk around in the property. And then I got upstairs. And when we went up the main staircase at this point, and it was really funny because as I started to get towards the top of the stairs, I lost this feeling, the cold, all of the pressure, everything just dissipated. And then suddenly there was a mad rush in the hallway of energy freezing by. And again, it felt like kids playing, right? And I was like, oh, this is interesting. And as we started to go through the bedrooms upstairs, that's when I really started to solidify the name Jane. Like, I kept hearing the name Jane over and over again. And and then, you know, we kind of finished, we were there for several hours too. And then we kind of left and, you know, away we went and we didn't go back. But when we went back again some years later, and this time it was not for doors open. This time we were with the ECDEV, with the Hamilton Economic Development. And we used to be a part of a group there for the film industry. And so we were going through the property again with other people. And once again, I ended up.
That was probably in the back of your mind about what happened the first time.
Oddly enough, I didn't really kind of think too much about it. But once again, as soon as I entered that one room, I could feel that icy presence again.
Yeah.
Except this time it didn't end up clinging to me. It was just, you know, there were spots in the room that felt incredibly cold. And at that point, I was kind of blocking, right? Because of my previous experience, I was sort of like putting up the energetic block around me as I walked through the property. But it's definitely was still there. And I know I have a friend who worked on Burdock as part of a crew. And they said that they just kept hearing things, and even, you know, unofficially, other, you know, people on the crew and even some cast members had felt.
That's interesting. I know I read on the website that when they started to do renovations, that's when they said they noticed things going on in the house. So I noticed that that's just a reoccurring thing, you know, with it seems everywhere. The minute the renovations start, things start waking up, you know.
Well, I think you're changing.
Don't change your wallpaper, you won't have ghosts.
Shifting.
No, I mean,
yeah.
Renovations, not just a little renovation, but you know.
No, you're not like paint isn't. But when you start to
yes,
do renovations, you change the
physically changing the house. That's right.
And so you're changing that flow of energy. I think that
right.
often is a disruptive. And I found that a few times, like running into actual spirits that can communicate. That, you know, these are some of the things that I think disrupt them most. But the interesting thing was, after my first experience there, I went home, and that's when I did a little, you know, let's do a little research on the property, and discovered that Buchanan had 11 children, but he only brought 8 to Canada when they came, because the other ones were behind. And one of his daughters was named Jane, and then he had a son. And
wild.
And again, like I said, I didn't feel that those were spirits. Like, they weren't, it was just energy, like energy.
Well, and they're from Scotland, and you have some Scottish heritage too, don't you?
I don't know that had much to do with it. I think it's just...
Probably not, but it was an interesting connection, I think.
But there seems to be a lot of residual energy in a lot of people were suffering from PTSD. And so there was a number of people that probably passed at the site. Now let's talk about the other part, because Trudy had sort of a similar experience to me. But Rachel, you have to see this weird addition church.
Okay, well, before we get into that, let me tell you about my experience.
Yes.
Sure.
So Trudy had the feeling of being followed the whole time, being watched.
I agree with that.
Yeah. Now, my paranormal experience in the building was when we were in what used to be the library.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Or the study of when the house was owned by the Young family.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were in there, and I'm taking photographs with my digital camera. And suddenly the screen on my camera just turned completely just white as a sheet of blank paper.
Wow.
And I stopped, and it's like, what the hell is this? And once I stopped trying to take pictures, the screen and the camera went back to normal operation. I tried again. The same thing happened. The viewfinder turned completely white as a sheet of paper.
Wow.
And so this time it's like, hey, Trudy, come here, look, you got to see this, watch this. So she came over. I tried again. This time the camera screen turned pitch black and completely froze up. Wow. And I had to pull the batteries out of the camera in order to get it unfrozen.
Wow. That's really wild.
So that was my experience in the building.
Yeah, well, and again, it's that energy, right, that happens in the building. There's a lot of it. And it has such an interesting past, with so many different things going on in there. The Buchanan family were there for not a really long time, like in the grand scheme of the age of the house, right? They were there for a short period. And then when they moved back in, they were there a little longer, but that was James and I forget which sister it was, but there was another sister there. But what's interesting about this property is originally it was described as a small fort on the hill because it had such an expansive wall all the way around the property. Like, can you imagine how big that wall was? Like, that was 90 acres. And it was literally surrounded by a wall. From what I can gather looking at the research, that wall went all the way around the property to the gatehouse.
Because where that gatehouse is, that's several city blocks away from the actual manor.
Yeah, it's quite huge. And so today there's only a little bit of that wall left when you go on the property. It's like the dovecote, and then there's that piece of wall that sort of runs down the side of the property. Yeah. And that's it. And the rest of the wall has been removed. But the old coach house and stables, like I said, the sisters turned that into additional living space, which I found really odd. Did you go into that building when you were there, Ian?
No.
No? Oh, we went into it. It was a very strange layout inside. It was definitely, you could tell it was an old coach, like an old, horse barn, essentially a shed, but quite big. I mean, it wasn't tiny. It's not small, but you could just see the feel of the carriage house and the horse stalls and the upper loft area that they turned into, because apparently the sisters, to raise money, rented out the lower part of the carriage house as accommodation to people.
Oh.
Yeah, sure. So they're like the Airbnb of the time, so that they could raise money, to keep their things going. Now, it seems like they did a fair amount of good in the community. I'm not going to disparage them. They did their thing. I find the addition on the property very strange and unnerving when I visit, and I don't know why. I just do. It's to me the creepiest part of the entire property.
Thank you for watching The Ghost Show Online. Join your hosts again next week as they discuss more tales of the supernatural, the paranormal, and all things spectacular. See you soon. See you soon.